Michael Turner had a peaceful life until leukemia turned everything into a battle for survival. After a near-death experience, he was guided by a mysterious man who led him to revisit his deepest and most painful moments, revealing unexpected lessons about pain, love, and purpose. For years later, when the disease returns, Michael knows his time is running out, and at the end of his journey, the same man reappears to take him back, leaving his family with a letter that will change their lives forever. What did this man reveal to Michael in his first experience? How did he deal with the return of his illness, knowing his final battle was near? And the most shocking thing, who really was that man who accompanied him in his darkest moments? Get ready for a touching story of love, acceptance, and second chances, where the true miracle lies not just in healing, but in the deep understanding that even in pain, there is light and purpose. Michael Turner was a 45-year-old man who lived a simple and happy life in Columbus, Ohio. He had been married to Sarah for 18 years, and together they had 2 children, Emily aged 14 and Jake aged 10. Michael was a manager at a hardware store and took pride in being able to provide for his family. They were not rich, but they lived comfortably and, above all, a lot of love. For years, Michael was a practical man who believed in hard work and honesty. Although he was raised in a religious family, he strayed from the faith in his youth. He wasn't against the idea of God, but he simply didn't see room for the spiritual in his busy life. Life is what we make of it, he used to tell his children. Michael's routine was simple and predictable. During the week, he worked in the store, while Sarah took care of the house and children. On the weekends, they enjoyed it together, taking trips to the park or getting together with friends for barbecues. Life seemed to follow a stable and peaceful course. Despite his calm temperament, Michael was an intense man in his family commitments. He made a point of being present at school assemblies, Jake's soccer competitions, and Emily's ballet performances. Everything revolved around them. Sarah often joked, "You're the dad who never takes a day off." But behind all this love for his family, Michael was afraid of one thing: losing control of his life. He liked knowing that he could solve problems that arose and keep everything in order. The idea of something unexpected or something he couldn't control terrified him, although he never talked about it. It was on an ordinary afternoon, while Michael was helping Jake assemble a model airplane, that he felt a deep pain in his back and a weakness that made him stop immediately. "I just need to get some rest," he said, but something inside him whispered that there was more behind that exhaustion. Over the next few days, the pain and fatigue intensified. Michael tried to ignore the symptoms, believing it was just stress from work or perhaps the flu. But after weeks of no improvement, Sarah insisted, "You need to see a doctor, Michael. This is not normal." Reluctantly, he agreed to go. After a series of tests, the results were revealed. Michael had leukemia. The news came as a devastating shock. He felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "Leukemia? How is that possible? I feel healthy, or I did," he babbled to the doctor. Sarah, by his side, held his hand tightly, but the tears streamed down her face in silence. From that moment on, everything changed. Michael was quickly admitted to the hospital to begin chemotherapy treatment. The hospital became his new home, and his life, once so predictable, turned upside down. He looked at Sarah and her children and asked himself, "What will happen to them if I don't survive?" "We're going to beat this," Sarah told him every night. "I'm here with you, Michael. We'll get through this together." But no matter how hard he tried to be strong, Michael felt fear growing inside him. The physical pain of the illness and treatment was immense, but the emotional pain of thinking about his family without him was almost unbearable. As the days passed, Michael's body began to weaken. Chemotherapy left him exhausted, and he felt his strength was fading. "I'm dying," he thought, although he never said those words out loud. He looked at the photos of his children on the table next to his hospital bed and silently prayed for more time. During one of his conversations with the doctor, Michael asked in a shaky voice, "Doctor, will I survive this?" The doctor, with a heavy look, replied, "We're doing everything we can, Michael. But the battle will be tough." This was the moment when Michael truly began to accept that his life was in the hands of something much bigger. After months of chemotherapy, Michael's body was exhausted. His immunity dropped drastically, and one night he was rushed to the ICU with a serious infection. Sarah was at the bedside, holding his hand as he struggled to breathe. He looked at her and, for the first time, saw the fear in his wife's eyes. "I don't want to leave you," he murmured, feeling his strength slipping away. Michael went into critical condition. He felt the air go out of him, as if he were slowly sinking into deep, dark waters. Everything around began to become distant, the sounds of the monitors, the doctor's voice asking for help, Sarah's hands holding his. Within minutes, darkness took over. "Is this the end?" he thought. Suddenly, everything changed. Michael no longer felt pain. He opened his eyes and found himself in a completely different place. It was no longer the hospital. All around him was a vast green field, illuminated by a serene and comforting golden light. The air was warm and soft, and an indescribable peace enveloped him. "Where am I?" he asked himself, looking around without recognizing the place. In the distance, he saw a figure walking towards him. He was a calm-looking man, with simple clothes and a calm smile on his face. Michael felt curiosity mixed with apprehension. He didn't know who the man was, but something about his presence was familiar, as if he had met him before. "You're early, Michael," the man said, without approaching any closer. "Who are you? What's going on?" Michael asked, confused but strangely calm. "Did I die?" he asked, finally voicing the fear that was in his heart. The man shook his head with a soft smile. "No, Michael. But you are in a moment of choice. There is still a lot you need to understand about your life." Michael felt a mixture of relief and confusion. "Choose? What does that mean?" he asked, taking a few steps towards the man. "I did what I could for my family. What else is there to understand?" The man did not respond directly. "Come with me, Michael. Let's revisit some moments." The man stretched out his hand, and in the blink of an eye, the green field disappeared. Michael found himself floating above a scene from his past. It was her old apartment, right after Emily was born. He saw his younger self holding his newborn daughter in his arms, while Sarah slept exhaustedly beside him. Michael felt his heart sink as he watched that scene. "I remember that day," he said in a low voice. "It was the first time I held Emily. I was so scared I wouldn't be a good father." The man beside him looked at him with a gentle expression. "Do you remember how you felt at that moment?" the man asked. Michael nodded slowly. "Yes. It was like my life changed forever. I knew nothing else mattered other than taking care of her and Sarah." Suddenly, the scene changed again. Now Michael found himself at work, having a particularly stressful day. He was arguing with a colleague about a problem at the store. "This is part of your life too," said the man. "Do you remember how you felt at that moment?" Michael was silent for a moment, observing his behavior at the scene. "I was frustrated, angry, but now it seems so small, so insignificant." The scene continued to change. This time, he saw a more recent image, the day he was diagnosed with leukemia. There he was, sitting in the doctor's office, with Sarah at his side. He clearly remembered that moment, the terror he felt when he heard the word cancer. "I thought my life ended there," Michael said, as he relived the moment. "You always thought controlling everything was the answer, Michael," the man said, his voice calm. "But life has ways of teaching us to let go of that control." The pain and suffering you feared so much also brings important lessons. Michael looked at the man, surprised. Lessons? What lessons can I learn from this? What can my family gain from my suffering? The man looked into Michael's eyes and said, suffering is part of everyone's journey. It brought you here, not to be a burden, but to teach you the true essence of love, forgiveness, and acceptance. It's not over yet, Michael. But you need to understand that pain can also bring growth. Michael tried to understand the man's words, but he still felt lost. So, you're saying I should accept all of this? The illness, the fear, the pain. This is what I need to learn? The man nodded, but there was something else in his gaze. It's not just about accepting, Michael. It's about understanding that even in pain, there is purpose. You were chosen to go through this because you have a strength that you don't yet recognize. As the man spoke, another scene appeared before them. This time, it was Sarah, sitting alone in the hospital while Michael was in the ICU. She held a photo of her family, tears streaming down her face. She's strong for you, Michael, the man said. But she also suffers. And in her suffering, she is discovering the power of unconditional love. Michael felt a lump in his throat when he saw his wife in that scene. She doesn't deserve this, he murmured, his voice breaking. She deserves a happy life, without all this pain. The man approached Michael and, for the first time, touched his shoulder. Pain and suffering are not punishments, Michael. They are inevitable parts of a larger process. But they can also bring renewal, if you let them. Suddenly the scene changed to his children. Emily was sitting next to Jake, trying to comfort him as he cried, asking when his father was coming home. Michael felt his heart break when he saw that scene. They are so young. How can this be fair to them? He asked, his voice full of emotion. The man responded calmly, they are part of this journey too, Michael. The difficulties they face now will shape who they will be in the future. Suffering is not the end, but a catalyst for growth, for deeper understanding of life and of love. Michael looked at his children and, for the first time, felt a spark of understanding. Maybe there was, in fact, something bigger in all of this. So what do I do now? Michael asked, feeling lighter but still uncertain. The man looked at him with a comforting smile. Now, you come back. But with a more open heart, willing to accept whatever life brings you, knowing that even in the darkest moments, there is light and purpose. Before Michael could say anything, he felt a strong pull. The green field and the man's figure suddenly disappeared, and he found himself back in the hospital bed. He gasped, opening his eyes, as the machines around him blinked and beeped frantically. He's back, shouted one of the nurses, while Sarah, next to the bed, cried with relief. The sense of peace that Michael had felt in the other place was still with him, but now there was something more, a clarity. He felt as if he had been touched by something greater, something that would completely change the way he saw life and its challenges. Sarah hugged him, relieved and crying. I thought I lost you, she said, her voice shaking. I'm here, he replied softly, feeling a new strength within him. In the days that followed, Michael constantly thought about his experience. He couldn't fully explain what had happened, but he knew it wasn't just a dream or a hallucination. Something real had happened to him on that golden field. He knew he had been given a second chance, and now it was his responsibility to do something with it. Michael began to share his reflections with Sarah. I've been somewhere else, he said one night. And someone spoke to me. It was a man, but he seemed to know everything about me, about my life, my fears. He showed me moments in my life that I had forgotten, and made me see that the pain I went through had a purpose. Sarah listened silently, intrigued. Who was he? She asked. Michael shook his head. I don't know. He was familiar, but at the same time, I'd never seen him before. He said I still had something to learn, and that my time here wasn't over. Sarah shook his hand, and together they reflected on the meaning of that. Despite the unanswered questions, Michael knew his life had changed forever. He felt a new gratitude for every moment he had with his family and began to see suffering in a new light. But despite this, the figure of that mysterious man continued to haunt her thoughts. Who was he? Why did I feel like I knew him? After his recovery, Michael began to reflect more deeply on his experience. He began to see life with new eyes, and, surprisingly, he reconnected with the spirituality he had abandoned many years ago. He found himself praying silently, seeking answers to what he had experienced. Maybe it was an angel, he thought at times, but the truth was that he couldn't get the feeling of familiarity out of his mind. One morning, as Sarah was organizing old family albums, Michael joined her. They were looking through old photos of their parents and grandparents, remembering stories the two had shared over the years. Suddenly, one photo in particular caught Michael's attention. It was an image of a man he had never seen before. Who is he? Michael asked, pointing to the man in the photo. He was standing next to his mother, with a calm and serene smile, very similar to the man Michael had encountered during his experience. Sarah looked at the photo and said, "That's your Uncle James. He died many years before you were born, when he was in his early 30s. Your mother always talked about him. She said he was a good man, very spiritual, but that his life was cut short by illness." Michael's blood ran cold. He didn't know what to say, for this was the man he had seen on the golden field. I think I saw him," he muttered in disbelief. Sarah looked at him, confused. "What do you mean, Michael? He died many years before you were born." Michael ran his hand over his head, feeling a chill run down his spine. It was him. The man who guided me was him. He told me that my journey was not yet over. Sarah, shocked, looked at Michael in silence. "Do you think he was the one who came to talk to you?" Michael nodded slowly, without taking his eyes off the photo. "I know it was him. He had that same look, that same calm. How could I have seen someone I've never met? It's impossible, but I know it was him." Michael had goosebumps from head to toe. He now understood that the man who had appeared during his near-death experience was, in fact, his Uncle James, someone he had never met in life, but who accompanied him at a crucial moment. The significance of this revelation shook Michael to his core, making him feel that his life was connected to something much greater than he had ever imagined. The revelation that his uncle, someone he had never met in person, had been the man who guided him through his experience, caused Michael to completely reevaluate his understanding of life, death, and suffering. "He knew everything about me," Michael reflected, remembering the moments the man showed during the experience. "He knew my fears, my regrets, and somehow he was there to help me." The pain Michael had faced with his illness now had a new meaning. He began to see suffering as part of a journey of learning and growth. "I went through the darkness to see the light," he told Sarah, as they talked about everything that had happened. "I didn't understand it at the time, but now it makes sense. The pain we experience here prepares us for something greater." Michael also started talking more to his children about life and the importance of facing challenges with courage. "Pain is not the end," he told them. "She teaches us to be stronger, kinder, and more grateful for every moment we have." Emily and Jake listened to their father's words carefully, realizing that something profound had changed in him. He also reconnected with the faith of his childhood, attending church again and trying to understand more about spirituality. "Life is a mystery," he told Sarah. "And I don't think we'll ever understand everything. But after what I've experienced, I know there's something greater guiding us, even in the most difficult times." Michael began to work less and began to value time with his family more. He and Sarah began taking more trips together, and he dedicated more time to being present in his children's lives. Every day was a gift, and he knew he could no longer waste the time he was given. Michael's near-death experience was not just a spiritual shift. She also brought a new perspective on what was really important. He now understood that even in difficulties, there was a purpose and a lesson to be learned. And, most importantly, he knew he was never alone, not even in his darkest moments. Michael couldn't stop thinking about his Uncle James. How did he know so much about me, he wondered. Even though Sarah tried to rationalize the experience, saying that maybe it was just a hallucination caused by chemotherapy, Michael knew, deep in his soul, that it had been real. He started visiting his mother more often, trying to learn more about the uncle he never met. He was a special man, his mother said proudly. He always had a deep connection with the spiritual, and even in his final days, he spoke about the purpose of life and the importance of love. These words echoed in Michael's mind, reminding him of the lessons the man on the golden field taught him. My uncle always believed that pain brought growth, Michael thought. He lived it, and now I understand what he meant. The connection he felt with his uncle, even though he had never met him, was inexplicable but profound. Each day, Michael felt more at peace with his past and the challenges he faced. He stopped asking why me, and began to accept that, in some way, he had been chosen to go through all of this. Not as a punishment, but as a path of transformation. Pain is not the end, he told Sarah. It's just part of the path, something that shapes us and prepares us for what's to come. Sarah listened intently, admiring how much Michael had changed since the beginning of his battle with leukemia. He was no longer the man who needed absolute control. Now, he was someone who accepted the mystery of life. Michael knew life would never be the same, but he was at peace with that. He had learned that even in the worst storms, there are lights that guide us, and sometimes those lights come from where we least expect them. Michael's near-death experience changed everything. Not just because he survived cancer, but because of the way he saw life, suffering and love. He knew there was something much bigger than he could see or understand. And, most importantly, I knew I was never alone, even in the worst circumstances. He began to live each day with a new purpose, valuing the small moments with his family and dedicating more time to the things that really mattered. The spiritual connection he had rediscovered became an important part of his life, and he found comfort in knowing that when his time came, there would be someone to guide him once again. The revelation that the man who guided him through his experience was his Uncle James brought peace to Michael's heart. He knew that somehow his family was connected across generations, and that love transcends time and space. His uncle had protected him and guided him through one of the most difficult times of his life, and that gave him the strength to move forward. Life is a mystery, he said. But I'm not afraid anymore. I know that no matter what happens, we are all connected. And the pain we face is just one part of that journey. These words brought comfort not only to him, but also to Sarah and her children, who saw the transformation in Michael and were inspired by his courage and wisdom. Time passed, and Michael continued to live with gratitude and purpose, knowing that each moment was a gift. He never looked at suffering the same way again. Now I saw pain as a teacher, and life as a series of lessons that, when accepted, lead us to a true understanding of who we are. In the end, Michael knew he had been saved not just by a physical miracle, but by a spiritual miracle. And with that, he lived out his days with a heart full of peace, love, and acceptance, knowing that when his time came, he would be guided once again by the one who had shown him the way before, his Uncle James. For years have passed since Michael's near-death experience. During this period, he lived intensely, enjoying every moment with Sarah and his children. Emily was now 18 and preparing to enter college, while Jake, now 14, was increasingly interested in sports. Life seemed to have returned to normal, but for Michael, the meaning of normal had changed forever. During these 4 years, Michael dedicated himself to his family, work, and his spirituality. He became more involved in the community, helping other families who were struggling and sharing his story with those who wanted to listen. His faith and connection to something greater had never been stronger, and he felt grateful for each day he lived. However, one day, upon returning from a walk with Sarah, Michael began to feel a familiar pain. It was a slight twinge in his back and a feeling of extreme tiredness, something he recognized immediately. Trying to remain calm, he hid his discomfort, but Sarah noticed. "Michael, is everything okay?" she asked, with a worried look. "It's just tired," he replied, trying not to alarm her. But deep down, he knew the illness had returned. After some tests, the doctor confirmed what Michael feared. The leukemia was back, and this time, it was even more aggressive. He looked at Sarah as the doctor explained the treatment options, but they both knew time was limited. "Let's fight again, like last time," Sarah said, holding his hand. Michael looked at her tenderly, but deep down, he knew this battle would be different. The return of the illness brought a mix of emotions for Michael. He had learned to accept suffering and see the purpose behind it, but the thought of leaving his family still shook him deeply. "Am I ready?" he asked himself. But unlike the first time, there was a peace within him that hadn't been there before. He knew that when the time came, he would be prepared. Michael opted for palliative treatment, knowing that this time his journey was coming to an end. He spent his days with Sarah and his children, enjoying every moment, no matter how small. Time seemed more precious than ever, and he knew every second counted. As the disease progressed, Michael spent most of his time at home, surrounded by his family. Sarah and her children cared for him lovingly, but they knew the end was near. "You've been so strong, Michael," Sarah said one night as she held his hand in bed. He smiled faintly and replied, "You gave me all the strength I needed." Michael began to prepare for the final moment. He talked often with Sarah and the children about the importance of moving forward, of being strong for each other. "You need to live," he said. "I will always be with you, but your life must go on, full of love and meaning." One afternoon, when he felt the end was getting closer, Michael asked Sarah for a special favor. "I want to write a letter," he said. Sarah, surprised, looked at him and nodded, bringing paper and pen. He spent the afternoon writing, in silence, with a serene expression on his face. It was as if he was leaving a part of himself in that letter, a final message to his family. When he finished, he sealed the letter and handed it to Sarah. "Just open it when I'm gone," he said, with a slight smile. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, held the letter to her chest, understanding the weight of that moment. "I love you, Michael," she whispered, and he replied, "I love you more than words can say." In the days that followed, Michael began to distance himself from reality. He became increasingly weak, and spent long hours sleeping. But despite the weakness, there was a deep calm in his eyes. He knew the moment was coming, and instead of fearing it, he accepted it with serenity. On the last night of his life, while Sarah and the children were by his side, Michael felt a familiar presence in the room. He slowly opened his eyes, and in the dim light he saw the man he had met in his near-death experience. His Uncle James was there, smiling softly. "It's time, Michael," the man said as calmly as before. "You accomplished your mission." Michael knew this was the moment. He looked at Sarah and her children, who were by her side, and felt a deep gratitude. There was no more fear, only peace. He held their hands and said in a weak but loving voice, "I am going in peace, carry the message I leave. I will always be with you." Sarah, Emily, and Jake were crying, but they knew Michael was ready to go. There was a soft light on his face, a quiet acceptance. "We love you, Daddy," Jake murmured, as he held Michael's hand. "We will always love," Emily added, trying to hold back the tears. Michael smiled one last time. "I know," he said, looking at them with deep love. "You have a beautiful life ahead of you." Live with purpose, with love, and never forget who you are." With those words, he closed his eyes and felt his uncle's presence at his side, ready to guide him. When Michael took his last breath, the room fell silent. Sarah and the children hugged each other, crying but knowing he was gone in peace. He had lived his life fully, learned his lessons, and was ready for the next journey. "He's with his uncle now," Sarah whispered to her children, trying to find comfort in the words. The next morning, Sarah opened a letter Michael had written. Her hands shook as she read her husband's final words. "If you are reading this, it is because I am gone. Don't cry for me, because I am at peace. You are my greatest joy, and knowing that you will continue with love and purpose brings me comfort. Always carry love in your hearts, and know that I will be with you, wherever you are." Michael's words resonated deeply with Sarah, Emily, and Jake. They were not just a farewell, but a message of hope and eternal love. Michael had left them physically, but his presence and his lessons would live on forever. And so, they promised to honor his memory by living life as he had taught, with purpose, love, and acceptance.